and welcome back to my channel. Welcome to my channel if it is your first time here. My name is Jess. I upload videos every Sunday and they are a mixture of bookish and lifestyle videos. So for today's video I'm going to be sharing with you my autumn or fall TBR. I like to set myself seasonal TBRs and I tend to pick around 10 books. Even though I will likely read more than that, I do like to give myself a little bit of flexibility and the chance to just go to my bookshelf and choose something which takes my fancy. So without further ado, let's jump into the 10 books which are going to be on my TBR this season. Also, side note, I'm sitting here today because honestly could not be bothered to sit on the floor. My bookshelves are just over here, but I was just not feeling sitting on the floor today, so new arrangement, possibly temporary. Not sure I like the colour, I feel a little bit orange, but we'll see. But that's why I am somewhere different today. Nothing has happened to my bookshelves, promise. So I had 2 books left over from my summer TBR. One I'm going to talk about in a minute. The other one was Blue Lily, Lily Blue by Maggie Stiefvater, which I have literally just finished reading. And for that reason, the final book in this quartet has appeared on this TBR, and that is The Raven King by Maggie Stiefvater. I am so excited to read this book. This is YA paranormal romance, and it is unlike anything that I have read before. Obviously because this is the last one in a series of 4, it's very difficult to talk about this particular book without any spoilers, but even talking to you about the premise of the first book, I don't think that you would get a full picture of what the stories are about, because there has been so much growth and change in the storyline and growth and change in the characters that even as I was thinking about the plot of the first book, it just seems so simplistic compared to what actually happens. But I'll do my best to summarise it for you in a spoiler-free way. So in the first book, we meet Blue, who is our main protagonist, and she is a girl who has grown up her whole life knowing that when she kisses her true love, he will die. And at the beginning of the book, Blue goes with her mother, who has psychic abilities, to something called the Corpse Road, and they do this every year, and they are able to see the spirits of people in their local area who will die in that year. And Blue sees the spirit of a boy from the local private boys' school, and then Blue falls in with a group of 4 boys from that school, and those boys are on a mission to wake a sleeping Welsh king. And it sounds totally far-fetched and totally balmy and bonkers, but there is just something so delightful about Maggie Stiefvater's writing that even this kind of really obscure, strange storyline makes sense. And it's not hugely diverse, but there is a range of characters with their own strong storylines and character development and progression, and honestly it's just so good. It's so good. I do think Maggie Stiefvater's style of writing is unlike anything that I've come across before. I think it's a little bit Marmite for people. You will either get on with it or you won't, but for me I've just absolutely loved it. The third book, obviously I'll talk about it more in my September wrap-up, but the third book was probably my least favourite of the 4, but as kind of a bridge into this finale it was fantastic, and I'm so excited to see how she's going to conclude this story. So yeah, this one definitely, in fact this is probably the book that I'm going to pick up next, because this just definitely had to be on my TBR for this season. Next up we have Once Upon a River by Diane Setterfield. This is a historical fiction novel with some fantasy and magical realism kind of woven in as well. Basically, one evening a man bursts in through the doors of an ancient inn which sits on the banks of the River Thames, and in his arms he is carrying the lifeless body of a young girl. Some hours later this young girl begins breathing again, and nobody knows if it's a miracle or if it's magic, and the girl is mute, so she's unable to say who she is, where she's from, what happened. And 3 families from very different walks of life, I think we've got a parsonage keeper, a farming family and a rich widow maybe, all come forward and try to claim this girl as their own. But each of these families has their own mysteries and their own secrets that kind of come to light in the journey to discover who this little girl actually is. And I'm so excited to read this. The 13th tale was so wonderful and so atmospheric, and if this book is anything like that, I think I'm just going to absolutely love it. So I'm very excited to be reading this one soon. Next up is the only book that I have left from my summer TBR, and that is Wondersmith, The Calling of Morrigan Crow by Jessica Townsend. This is the second book in a series. The first one was Nevermore, The Trials of Morrigan Crow. So again, it's very difficult for me to talk too much about what this particular story is about without any spoilers. So I will basically explain the premise of the first book, and then this book I believe is just picking up from where that one left off. So in the first book we meet our protagonist Morrigan Crow, a young girl who has grown up her whole life believing she is a cursed child. She believes that she is the cause of bad luck and problems for anyone that she comes into contact with, and worst of all, she's doomed to die at midnight on her 11th birthday. Instead, she is swept away by a total stranger and taken to the magical land of Nevermore, and the story kind of unfolds from there. And it's a little bit of coming of age of Morrigan discovering who she really is, and it's just Morrigan as a protagonist. I think I've said this before, but Morrigan as a protagonist is just such a likeable heroine. She's just really well-rounded and well-written. As a story, it's just so fun and so whimsical, and although it is a children's fantasy book, I don't think I said that, this is a children's fantasy book, I'm very excited to continue on with the story and see where it goes. Meg read this just before the summer and she said it was great, and I always love a little bit of children's fiction just to lighten things up a little bit, so I am excited to continue with this and see where it goes next. Then we have A Woman of War by Mandy Robotham. This is a World War II historical fiction novel which was gifted to me by Avon Books. It's set in 1944 Germany and tells the story of a political prisoner, Anka, who is being held at the Ravensbrück concentration camp, and Anka is forced to become the midwife for a very high-ranking Nazi, Hitler's mistress, Eva Braun, and we follow the story of Anka as she finds herself torn between her desire to want to help any woman who is pregnant and going into childbirth, and her struggle against a regime which she wholeheartedly disagrees with, and then throw into the mix the fact that she falls in love with someone that she perhaps shouldn't, and things get quite complicated. So it says on the front, a forbidden love, an impossible choice, a fight for survival. And I think the thing which I find most interesting aside from the story itself is that the author is a practicing midwife, so I really feel like that's going to add a different element to the story, and the fact that our protagonist is a midwife. Yeah, I just think that's going to be really interesting. So yeah, thank you to Avon Books for sending this to me. I'm very much looking forward to reading it shortly. Next up is another World War II fiction novel, which again was gifted to me this time by Penguin Random House UK, and that is The Children's Block by Otto B. Krause. This will be released in the UK on the 17th of October, and it is based on the author's real life experiences. So it says on the back, Alex Ellen is a poet, a prisoner and a teacher in Block 31 in Auschwitz-Birkenau, the Children's Block. He spends his days trying to survive while illegally giving lessons to his young charges, shielding them as best he can from the impossible horrors of the camp. But trying to teach the children is not the only illicit activity that Alex is involved in. Originally published as The Painted Wall, Otto B. Krause's autobiographical novel tells the true story of 500 Jewish children who lived in the Czechs family camp in Auschwitz-Birkenau. I'm very interested to read this. Thank you to Penguin Random House for sending it to me. I think that it is going to be a very difficult book to read, probably just because of its historical accuracy, but as always with this type of book, I think it's also very important. It's very important that these stories are able to be told, and I always struggle with this. I don't want to say that I'm looking forward to reading it or that I enjoyed it or any word that has kind of a positive spin on it. So I hope that you know what I mean, that I am interested and intrigued to pick this up and to see what it's about. And yeah, I'm looking forward to reading it, but not in a oh this is really light-hearted and fluffy kind of way. I think I've waffled on enough, yeah, but yeah, this one is also on my TBR. The next book on my list is one that I am putting on here because I feel like it's a book that I want to read. It was lent to me by a friend, and I feel like it's the right time of year to read it, but honestly just don't know if I'm going to be too much of a coward to read it. It is Devil in the White City, Murder, Magic and Madness at the Fair That Changed America by Eric Larson. This is a true crime book, and it is the true story of two men, the architect who built the world famous 1893 World Fair and the serial killer who used that Chicago fair to lure his victims to their death. And yeah, I'm really interested to read it, but at the same time if it's graphic, I just don't know if I'm going to be able to read it, so I'm going to give it a go. I want to be able to read it. I think it's going to be fascinating, but am I going to be able to do it? I just don't know. I just don't know. We will let's reserve judgment and see how I get on. Just don't know. Next up we have a book which has been on and off and on and off my TBRs for so long, but I am determined to get to it this season, and that is Skin by Ilka Tampke. This is historical fiction with some fantasy elements. It's set in AD 43, so Iron Age Britain, right on the cusp of the Roman invasion, and we follow the story of our protagonist Aelia, who is something of an outcast in her tribe. She is not permitted to marry, she's not permitted to take part in any of the tribal ceremonies or learn anything about her ancestors. She's very much an outsider, but it is this woman who will somehow save and protect her people from the growing threat of the Romans and an uncertain future. And this is a book which is not talked about too much on BookTube. I don't think I've ever seen anybody talk about having read it, but it was recommended by someone that I follow on Instagram, and I'm just very excited. I love anything set in a time in history that I'm not hugely familiar with. I don't think I've ever read anything apart from maybe like Arthurian books set during this time. Yeah, just very excited, and I'm definitely going to make it a priority to read it this time. Next up is a book that I kind of ummed and ahed about putting on my TBR, A because it's absolutely massive, B because it's just an interim novel, and C because with this author I have a funny relationship with the works of this author, because when I'm reading her books I really enjoy them. I do have a few issues with some of her writing choices, but on the whole I enjoy them. But when I'm not reading them, I don't have any great desire to kind of jump into the next one. Sometimes when you're reading a series all you want to do is binge read it, and I don't find that with this author. But I've read 5 books in this series now, so I kind of feel like I need to carry on. I'm pretty sure there's this one and then one more book and then I'm done. So I'm putting it on my TBR. Let's see how we get on, and it is Tower of Dawn, a Throne of Glass novel by Sarah J Maas. If you've been around my channel for a while, you will know about my relationship with the writings of Sarah J Maas and some of her choices and the way she writes. I just have a bit of an issue with it. Everybody has to stalk or prowl and etc etc. This book, I've called it an interim book because I don't know what the actual technical term is, but it's 2 characters who have sort of stepped away from the main overarching storyline to kind of go and do something else, and this is their story. I think it takes place at the same time as the last book I read, which was An Empire of Storms, I'm gonna say. It's kind of running alongside the storyline of that one, I think. I'm not entirely sure. It's been quite a while since I read An Empire of Storms. It's absolutely huge. It's also very difficult to talk about this because, as I said, I'm pretty sure it's like 5 or 6 books in there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Empire of Storms was the 5th book, so this is the 6th book, if you exclude An Assassin's Blade, which is a novella. So I'll talk very briefly about the first book and what that's about, to kind of give you an idea. So this is a YA new adult fantasy. It is not suitable for younger readers. It is very, very dark in places, and it does have sexual content as well, so it's not for young adults. So our protagonist is a girl called Selena, who at the very beginning is being held prisoner, and she is given the option to end her imprisonment if she competes and wins to become an assassin for the king. And we kind of follow Selena's journey, her coming of age. There is fae, there is witches and dark magic, old magic, all kinds of magical creatures in between. And yeah, this is, as I said, this is two of those characters kind of stepping away from the main storyline. So I'm not too sure what happens in this book, but I'm putting it on my TBR. I'm going to give it a go. Let me know if you've read it and if it's worth it, because I still am umming and ahhing. Could very, very easily just put this to the side and forget that I need to read it. But I'm hoping that I'll be able to tick it off the list this month, or this season. Okay, the final two books that I'm going to talk about. I am hosting a reading retreat at the start of October, and I really wanted to take a specific type of book on that retreat. I was feeling some dark fantasy, which I could just kind of get completely absorbed in, but I was also feeling the need for something familiar, and I'll talk a little bit about that in more detail in a minute, but I'm going to talk about the dark fantasy option that I'm considering first. So that is 3 Dark Crowns by Kenda Blake. I understand that the final book in this series has just been released, which I feel like is a good time to pick this series up, because if I really enjoy it, I can just binge read the whole thing. So as I said, this is dark YA fantasy, and it's about 3 sisters, triplets, who each represent a different type of magic, and each generation triplets are born to the current reigning queen, and the twist is basically only one of them can inherit the crown, and they have to fight literally to the death. And on the eve, I think, of their 16th birthday, they have to basically begin the battle for the crown, and only one of them can survive, only one of them can become the reigning queen. I'm very, very excited. I've heard really, really good things about Kenda Blake's writing and this series in general, and I feel like this would be a really good book to take on my retreat and just get totally, totally lost in. And I think even if I don't read it at the retreat, I am in the mood for some dark fantasy, and this may just tick that box for me. So yeah, pleased to be adding this one on. And then the final book that I'm going to talk about, I kind of half started a conversation about this over on Instagram, because I was really struck by the desire to reread a series and fall back into something that is really familiar and comforting to me, but I was torn because I'm currently in the middle of a reread of A Song of Ice and Fire, the Game of Thrones books, and I'm also rereading the Inheritance series by Christopher Paolini, so it seemed kind of counterintuitive to start rereading yet another series, and on top of that I have just so many unread books that I need to get to. But I have not read, this author has basically written a whole host of books set in the same world, and she has broken it up into different trilogies, and I have not read the final 2 books of the final trilogy of one of these strands of books, and I'm being a big wuss about it because I kind of don't want the stories of these characters to end, but I also want to know what happens. So I thought, what better way to do it than to go right back to the beginning and kind of re-follow the journey and then read the stories through to their completion. But I'm kind of just torn between whether it's worth doing it or not. So at the same time, I feel like this would be a great book to take with me on my retreat, and I can just get completely absorbed in the world again. I don't know. I'm kind of talking myself in and talking myself out doing it the whole time. So I am talking about Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. This is book 1 of the Farseer trilogy. As I said, Robin Hobb, who I feel like is a really undervalued and under-talked about author in the book community. This is adult fantasy, and she has written a whole host of books set in a world that she calls the Elderling Realm, and this is the first book in the first trilogy about the characters Fitz and the Fool, and it is the final 2 books of that trilogy about those 2 characters, if that makes sense, that I want to read but can't quite read because I don't want the story to end, because I love Fitz and the Fool and I just, My mind is a mess about the whole thing. Yeah, I don't know what to do. These books, if you're not familiar, are adult fantasy. They are very much character driven rather than plot driven. One of the things that I really love about Robin Hobb's writing is that she doesn't shy away from her characters making stupid decisions. So oftentimes you can find yourself quite frustrated with the main characters, but I also think that really humanises them, and it just brings an added element of interest to the story as well. These books are definitely not for everyone. If you like kind of pacey, plot-driven books, I don't think that you would get on with these, but I just love them. They're some of the first fantasy books that I ever read. I've never reread them. I've just kind of slowly been making my way through all of Robin Hobb's other books and any of the books that are in the Elderling realm. And yeah, I don't know. I feel like I could take this book with me on the retreat, read it, and then decide if I want to kind of continue on, but it would mean completely pushing Game of Thrones and the Inheritance cycle off to the side and drawing a line under it for now, because this book is actually not a bad size, but the books kind of double and triple in size as you get further along. I don't know what to do, BookTube. I don't know what to do. I'm putting it on my TBR anyway, and yeah, we'll see. We'll see. And then I haven't mentioned them because I don't know what they are yet, but there will also be 2 picks for the Bookish Mamas book club that I helped to run. I've already read September's book, which was The Man Who Didn't Call by Rosie Walsh. In October we will be reading a thriller, and in November we will be reading a non-fiction. So we will have those 2 books to add to my TBR as well. But that is it for now. I'm sorry that this was a little bit waffly, I feel. If you enjoyed it regardless, please don't forget to give me the thumbs up, leave me a comment, subscribe to the channel, all the usual stuff. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you all soon.